What if I told you there was something that you can do in your homeschool that could help save civilization? You may be thinking, yeah, that's cute. I just like to save the casserole that I left in the oven too long. But it's true. You have at your disposal an amazing and powerful tool that, when employed, can help change your children and therefore the world. So let's stop underestimating what we can do in our little homeschools, and let's find out the power of the right kind of books used the right way and how that can quite literally change history. In this video, I want to share some reasons for reading hard books, how you can do that with your children, and why this is so critical for us to do in our modern times. Hi, my name is Laura from The Living Homeschool. I am a mother of 3. I have been using the Charlotte Mason method for over 20 years now in our homeschool. And in this channel, I hope to encourage and inspire new and seasoned homeschool moms alike as we do this great and wonderful work. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, I'd love it if you would subscribe and like this video. All right, so in this video, as I said, we're going to talk about how we can use hard books in our homeschools and how we can help shape the world in which our children are living. All right, so first of all, we need to talk about what are hard books. This is obviously relative to every situation. It's going to be relative to the age of your children, to their capacities and their capabilities. It's relative considering how much exposure they've had to hard books in the past. It's relative to your exposure to hard books and what you're comfortable with and what you even know is out there for you to utilize. So obviously you're going to do the best you can, and when you know better, you're going to do better. All right, so hard books are simply books that stretch us beyond our comfort zone. So you're going to begin, for the most part, utilizing hard books as read-alouds. Obviously, you're going to do that until your children are fluent. But even after they have gained fluency, I would definitely encourage you to continue reading aloud to your children. And the hard books are the good ones to do that, because then you can work through the ideas and grapple with the concepts that the author is causing you to wrestle with together as a partnership as you work through these hard books. So I want to encourage you to start early. Now, again, obviously you may be watching this video and thinking, oh, my kids are 12 and 13 or 12 and 15, or they're already in their high school years. That's okay. Again, once you know better, you do better, but you have to obviously start where your children are. But if you have the ability to start very young, I would highly encourage you to do that for several reasons. And I know we get really hung up on, well, what if my child doesn't understand all of it? That is okay. It doesn't matter if they miss some things. They don't need to catch everything. For one thing, they may come back around in their later years and reread this stiff book, and then they'll be coming back with more background knowledge, and they can kind of go a little bit deeper in that book. But it's all right if your young children don't catch everything. For one thing, they're entirely used to not understanding a lot of what's going on around them. That's nothing new to them. A lot happens all of the time that they don't fully understand. They're used to it. We have a little bit harder time, and we get kind of tripped up in that idea, but our children are used to it. And so if we can just kind of let that go and not worry about it, they certainly don't worry about it either. So we want to start early. We're not going to be concerned if they don't catch everything. That's all right. It's so important to do this, though, because they really feel a sense of accomplishment when they finish a book. And this sense of accomplishment leads to confidence in their ability to handle and grapple with hard books. And when they have the experience of already having done it, they're not concerned when another hard book comes their way, because they have that experience and that background of already dealing with hard books. And why not? I can do another hard book. That doesn't bother them when they have this confidence from the very beginning. I doubted this myself when I first read Charlotte Mason and heard discussing using some very stiff titles with, in my mind, very young children. But I believed her, and I went along, and I have been overwhelmed by my children's response to utilizing hard books. One of the books that she suggested that young children read was Pilgrim's Progress. And Pilgrim's Progress, not diluted down in a child's version, but rather in the original language. And so I said, okay, Charlotte, I'm going to do it. And so with my 7-year-old, we began just 15 minutes once a week, slowly reading through Pilgrim's Progress. It took us 2 years to get through it. And it was by far my son's favorite lesson of the week. And he still recalls it fondly now. Do I think that when he goes back in high school years and rereads that he'll have a different experience, a deeper experience? Yes, but what he narrated from that absolutely blew me away. And he's not afraid of handling hard books. He loves his Shakespeare reading. We just read Odyssey, and he was totally enthralled by that as a 6th grader. So this will build confidence. The other thing it does in children is it develops this fine wine taste for good quality literature, especially when you start young. My oldest son is now almost 25. He is severely dyslexic. And so when he was young, I had to read everything to him. In fact, I read almost everything to him until halfway about through his junior year. But he didn't read a chapter book until early in his teen years. Unbeknownst to me, he read his first book, informed me when he was finished, and I love to this day that the book he chose was The House at Pooh Corner. But his very next book that he insisted on was The Lord of the Rings. And I tried to talk him down from that. Look at all these other wonderful classic children's books you could be reading. And he didn't doubt that those weren't nice stories, but he had developed such a fine wine for literature that he knew how long it was going to take him to read a book, and he wanted to use that time for the very best. It took him well over a year to finish that book on his own, but he enjoyed every minute of that hard work of reading that quality book. Okay, so we're talking about dense classic novels, intricate historical accounts, books on politics and philosophy, geography concepts, of course, poetry and Shakespeare. So after we get through what is a hard book and kind of how do we begin doing that, we want to talk about the benefits of reading hard books. And the first great benefit is that it is for the good of your child. So let's break this down a little bit and talk about how it helps your child. First of all, it helps to build intellectual stamina. Not even the content and the great ideas that your child will get from reading the books. Even before that, the simple act of having to read and work through a book of this caliber is going to require great patience, a lot of focus, and perseverance. And this is going to develop some really important character qualities and some habits and some good discipline in your child. The mere act of working through a book like this does wonders for their own moral education. Additionally, of course, they're going to develop some really deep and sustained thought. These authors do not just sprinkle some superficial ideas and serve it up by midway through chapter 2. These authors go deep and they make you dig for it and work for it. And so this is going to develop this really deep and sustained thought in your children. And it's also going to cause your children to really have to engage in some really weighty matters, some real weighty questions of life. And they're going to come out the other end with a lot of clarity and insight that they didn't have before. Secondly, it's going to force your child to wrestle with some really big ideas. You know, truth is often not simple. It can be very nuanced. they are going to have to ask questions and try to answer them, like, what is justice? What is virtue? What is living the good life? What makes a hero? All of those things are important questions for your children to grapple with and debate in their own minds. Obviously, it's going to expand vocabulary and their complex sentence structure, which is going to aid in their own written compositions. And finally, it's going to help them to connect with the past in a way that a simple history book isn't going to do when they read the thoughts and the works of the great thinkers and writers of those who lived during that time. So it's important not only to read hard, stiff books, it's important to read old books. C.S. Lewis said that reading old books ensures we aren't trapped in the blind spots and characteristic mistakes of our own era. He further said, the only palliative is to keep the clean breeze of the centuries blowing through our minds, and this can be done only by reading old books. Two heads are better than one, not because either is infallible, but because they are unlikely to go wrong in the same direction. We all, therefore, need the books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period, and that means the old books. So our modern wisdom may correct some old misunderstandings, and old wisdom may correct some current present blindness we have about our own era. And so we can be saved from, shall we say, chronological snobbery, thinking that the modern man has all the right answers now and those who went before us are kind of developing, but now we've come into our own. Reading old books corrects that kind of arrogance pretty quickly. All right, so again, we're going to start young and we're going to build up from there. And of course, we're always going to mix in some easier books. We don't want their full curriculum to be just one stiff, hard book after another. We're going to sprinkle in the stiff books over their other books that are more comfortable reading level. We don't want to frustrate our children in our desire for them to grow in this area. Okay, so obviously reading good old books is good for our child, but additionally and more broadly, it is good for society. All literature, poetry, and I would suggest most nonfiction is written using metaphor. The poet Robert Frost said, "Unless you are at home in the metaphor, you are not safe anywhere." So at its basic, a metaphor is simply a figure of speech that directly compares two very unlike or different things, unrelated things, by saying one thing is basically the same as the other in some way. So examples, time is money. He has a heart of gold. Life is a roller coaster. I'm drowning in lesson plans. The thing is, metaphors are not just decorative. They are literally how our brain structures reality. So the more at home we are through wide reading of classic prose and poetry, the better we are at understanding the world around us. So quite literally, reading old hard books equals a better understanding of the life we live. So this is the power of the metaphor. Now, George Lakoff, who wrote the book Metaphors We Live By, talks about the power of abstract thought. And he says that the mechanism by which the human brain processes concepts that aren't physically in front of it is by use of the metaphor. So things like things are looking up. The science has caught up. Things and science are very abstract ideas. Our brain conceptualizes these abstract ideas by thinking about actual physical experiences. The things physically are looking up. The science is physically running a race and catching up. Some research that was done and written about in the Journal of Frontiers in Human Neuroscience mapped metaphor circuitry in the brain. And they proved that when you process an abstract thought, you're activating the same sensory motor region for the actual physical experience. So take the metaphor, for example, she is a warm person. So here we're describing the personality, the affection of a person to a physical temperature, that being warm. So where did that come from? Well, it came from when you were a young baby, cuddled against your mother. You're feeling the love and affection, those feelings and emotions you're getting from the safety of being next to your mother, and you're actually feeling her body heat, the warmth coming and radiating from your mother. So the brain is creating pathways simultaneously of the feeling of affection and the sense of warmth against your skin. And that metaphor helps us to understand what the brain needs to process of what does it mean that something has affection. All right, so this works for like the concept of social pressure. So your brain is going to reach back for that feeling of actual weight on your body. Moral purity, your brain is going to reach back for that area of physical cleanliness. Northwestern University actually did a rather large experiment in 2006, and they asked a big group of people to participate in this study. And a group, or about half of those participants were asked to consider a rather morally impure situation. And over again, that group was much more likely to accept an antiseptic hand wipe that was offered to them on the way out than the other group. So our brain conceptualizes physical cleanliness with moral cleanliness. The brain is tapping into the physical act of cleaning ourselves when we think about purging some moral, or rather immoral thoughts from our mind. And this is why, when you see something or hear about something that just is kind of like ick, we talk about, I just feel like I want to take a shower. Or, I bleach. That's the same idea. Our brain is reaching back for the physical activity of cleaning ourselves and relating that to the abstract idea of moral purity or impurity. It's how our brain processes these ideas. Paul Thibodeau, who is a cognitive linguist, he wrote Metaphors We Think With, The Role of Metaphor Reasoning. And really interesting story he tells about a city that was dealing with a rather high crime rate. And he talks about when the crime rate was described as a beast in the city. By and large, overwhelmingly, the people of the city wanted punitive consequences. But when the crime was talked about as a virus infecting the city, overwhelmingly, the people chose social intervention. Same city, same crime rate, very different policy conclusions. The only difference being the metaphor that was used. So metaphors are not just descriptive. They're not just the flowery language that we put into poetry. They literally shape the way we problem solve and see the world. This is why movies often feel so predictive, because the art and literature is expressing in metaphor the physical experiences that we're having, or maybe the ones we fear we may have soon. So as we build up this huge storehouse of metaphors in our students' minds through wide reading of classic hard literature and poetry, we are improving them and empowering them to be able to better understand their physical reality. So reading quality books not only will obviously cause your student to flourish in their imaginative and critical thinking, it will also cause them to become better citizens, wise and discerning members of society, not sheep who will be led this way or that based on whatever, strategically placed metaphor there was to describe the thing. So with that being said, go forth, right? And may your homeschool save the day. Until next time, bye-bye.